Somewhere in Level Cross, North Carolina, sits a garage that has never been open to the public. Not once. Not for money. Not for documentaries. Not even for the serious collectors who flew in just to make offers. Richard Petty turned every single one of them down. Inside that building rests somewhere between 15 and 20 race cars, stacked on top of each other, untouched for decades, along with artifacts no museum has ever been allowed to display. The real question is not what those things are worth. The question is why the most celebrated driver in NASCAR history chose to keep all of it hidden, and what that choice reveals about the man behind the legend. Before you can grasp what is in that garage, you have to understand the scale of what Richard Petty actually did. Without that context, the contents are just old cars and dusty trophies. With it, they become something else entirely. 200. That is the number of NASCAR Cup Series wins he stacked up across a career that ran from 1958 to 1992. The next closest driver in history is David Pearson, with 105. Petty has nearly double the wins of the second most successful driver who ever lived. 7 Cup Series championships. 7 Daytona 500 victories. 123 pole positions. 513 consecutive starts between 1971 and 1989. 1,184 total starts across 35 years. These are not records that have been slowly worn down. They sit so far beyond what anyone else has done that the sport stopped treating them as targets and started treating them as permanent features of the landscape, like a mountain nobody is going to move. But the numbers alone do not explain the garage. Petty Enterprises, the family team his father Lee founded in Level Cross in 1949, became the most decorated operation in NASCAR history. Lee won 3 championships of his own before Richard took over the number 43 car. Maurice Petty, Richard's brother, engineered the engines that powered most of those 200 victories. Their cousin Dale Inman served as crew chief for the majority of the career. For members of the same family from the same small North Carolina town, all inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. The compound where the cars were built and tuned and sent out to dominate the sport for 4 decades is still standing. And the garage at the center of it has not been fully opened to an outsider in years. What those 15 or 20 buried race cars actually mean is harder to measure than you might think. Richard Petty has said he never thought much about saving old race cars while he was still competing. In the 1960s and 70s, a used race car was just a used race car. Teams needed money to build the next one. So cars got sold to smaller teams, stripped for parts, or simply left behind. He has admitted he sold some of his cars to West Coast racers for whatever he could get, because nobody imagined a battered stock car could one day be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody thought about trying to save them. So they did not. The ones that did not get sold, the ones that were simply too far gone or too tangled up in other things to move, ended up stacked behind the garage in Level Cross. Not displayed. Not restored. Not labeled. Just stacked on top of each other in a field, sitting in the North Carolina weather for decades. What those cars represent in racing history is difficult to calculate. What they represent in mist preservation is something Petty has reflected on with a candor most legends never offer. He knows what was lost. He has said so. The cars that survived inside the garage were kept for different reasons, reasons that had nothing to do with market value and everything to do with what they meant to the people who drove and built them. That distinction matters. A car kept for its auction price is a financial asset. A car kept because of what happened inside it on a specific afternoon at a specific track is something money was never attached to in the first place. The garage in Level Cross is full of the second kind. And 2 vehicles there sit at opposite ends of the story. The first is the Plymouth Superbird. Built in 1970 specifically to exploit NASCAR's rules around aerodynamic modifications, it was designed for one purpose: to go faster than everything else on an oval. Its pointed nose cone and massive rear wing were not styling choices. They were engineering decisions made by Chrysler's racing division to cut drag and add downforce at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour. Petty won 18 races in Plymouth Products that season, and the Superbird became permanently tied to his number 43 in a way no other car quite matched. The version sitting in the level cross garage has not been restored. It has not been cleaned for display. Tire debris still clings to the undercarriage. The bodywork carries the marks of racing contact from decades ago that were never fixed because the car was never meant to be a showpiece. A comparable Superbird with Petty provenance would rank among the most significant pieces of American motorsport history available anywhere. It has not been made available anywhere. The second car is older, less glamorous, and in some ways more important. It is a 1957 Oldsmobile, built by hand by Lee Petty and his sons in the family garage, the car in which Richard made his NASCAR debut. Crude by any measure. Rusted in the way steel rusts when it is kept because of what it means rather than what it is worth. The Superbird represents the peak of what Petty became. The Oldsmobile represents the moment before any of it existed, when a 20-year-old from a small North Carolina town first pointed a car at a racetrack and found out what he was made of. Both sit in the same garage. Neither is for sale. But the cars are only part of what is hidden. At the back of the main garage, past the tools and the stacked equipment from decades of racing operations, there is a smaller room. Former employees have described it over the years. It does not appear on any tour route. It is not referenced in official museum materials. The people who know about it tend to describe it the same way, a place where the things too personal for public display were quietly set aside. What is reportedly in that room goes beyond the cars and the trophies. There are boxes of fan letters from the 1960s and 70s, many of them never opened, kept not because Petty planned to answer them but because discarding them was never something he was willing to do. Letters from children. Letters from veterans. Letters from people who found something in watching him race that connected to their own lives in ways they felt compelled to write down and send to a stranger in North Carolina. He kept them. There are also items associated with Dale Earnhardt Sr., who died on the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500. Petty and Earnhardt were rivals across 2 decades, 2 completely different personalities and driving styles who developed a mutual respect that ran deeper than most of what gets said in public. What Petty has kept from that relationship sits in the back room. Those who have seen it describe the objects not as souvenirs but as the kind of things you hold on to when someone you understood better than most is suddenly gone. There is reportedly also the frame of the car from Petty's most significant crash, the 1980 wreck at Pocono Raceway in which his car went airborne, barrel-rolled multiple times, and came to rest after absorbing the kind of impact that has ended careers and lives. Petty walked away. The frame was kept as it came out of the wreckage. It has not been straightened or cleaned. It sits in the condition it was in when the rescue crew finished with it. He has never explained publicly why he kept it. The people who have seen it say the explanation is obvious the moment you are standing in front of it. The financial value of everything inside that garage is genuinely hard to estimate because so little of it has ever been offered for sale. Insiders who have assessed parts of the collection have suggested the total figure, accounting for the cars, the memorabilia, the handwritten pit notes and setup logs from championship seasons, the race-worn equipment, and the personal artifacts, could reach $10 million or more depending on market conditions. Petty has received offers. Private collectors have approached him. Institutions have expressed interest in acquiring portions for rotating exhibitions. None of those conversations went anywhere. He has turned down every serious offer, not because he disputes the value, but because the value is not the point. The things in that garage were not accumulated as investments. They were kept because letting them go felt like letting go of something that had no replacement. What makes those refusals more striking is the financial pressure Petty Enterprises was under in its final years. The team that had dominated for decades struggled badly in the late 1990s and early 2000s as the sport grew more expensive and corporate. Petty brought in outside investment and tried several restructuring arrangements before finally rebranding the operation as Petty's Garage in 2008, shifting the focus entirely toward custom car building and restoration. During those difficult years, the contents of that private garage represented a financial lifeline he never touched. Collectors and auction houses understood what was in there. Offers came in during the lean years specifically because the timing made acceptance more plausible. He turned those down too. The garage was never going to become a financial instrument, no matter what the balance sheet looked like. The Petty Museum, which his late wife Linda established in 1988 and which eventually moved back to the Level Cross compound in 2014, handles the public-facing portion of the family's legacy. Visitors can see championship cars, trophies, uniforms, and equipment carefully organized for display. The museum is thorough and serious and well worth the visit. It is also emphatically not the same thing as the private garage. The museum contains what Richard Petty was willing to share. The garage contains what he was not. The distinction between those two categories is where the real story lives. And the emotional temperature of that story changed forever in the year 2000. Richard Petty has been asked in various forms over the years why he keeps so much of his history private rather than sharing it with the fans who made his career possible. His answer has stayed consistent. Some things are not for crowds. They are for the people who were there. Kyle Petty, Richard's son, raced professionally for over 2 decades and carries the family name into a third generation. He has spent time in the garage. He does not film it or discuss it in detail publicly. Petty's grandson Thad Moffat, who competes in Truck Series events, has also been inside. The garage functions for the family the way certain rooms in certain houses function, as a place where the weight of shared history is stored and occasionally revisited without needing to be explained to anyone outside. Kyle himself has had a complicated relationship with the weight of the family name. He raced in Richard's shadow his entire professional career, winning 8 Cup Series races across 18 years, a respectable career for almost any other driver and one that was consistently measured against his father's 200. He has spoken honestly about what it meant to grow up as the son of the most statistically dominant driver in the history of the sport, and about how the garage represented something different to him than it did to the fans and collectors who wanted access. To them it was history. To Kyle it was home. The tools hanging on the walls were the same tools he grew up watching his uncle Maurice and his father use. The cars were not artifacts from a golden era. They were the cars he watched being built as a child in the same building where he later learned to work on engines himself. What changed everything connected to that garage was the death of Adam Petty in May of 2000, during a practice session at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. Adam was Kyle's son and Richard's grandson, 20 years old and already competing professionally, the 4th generation of Pettys in NASCAR. He died when his throttle stuck and his car struck the outside wall at speed. He was the first 4th-generation professional athlete in any American sport, and he was gone before most of the people who would have watched him race had any idea who he was. Kyle has said that losing Adam restructured everything he understood about what the family legacy meant and what it was worth protecting.